A year into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is Israel maintaining its policy of neutrality? Is the Russian presence in Syria still a good enough reason for the Jewish state to decline underdog Ukraine's repeated requests of anti-missile defense systems? To find out answers to these questions, I turn to Ksenia Svetlova. Svetlova immigrated to Israel from Moscow at age 14 and fluent in Arabic. For years, she was able to use her Russian passport to report from areas most Israelis will never see in the Middle East. I first met Svetlova about 18 years ago when, as a flashy Russian-language TV news star, she came to me and offered to write articles on Palestinian affairs in the Middle East for the magazine I then edited. In 2015, she renounced her Russian passport and stepped away from journalism to join the Knesset in the Zionist Union party headed by Tsipi Livni. Svetlova served there until 2019. I always appreciated how Svetlova couches situations such as the feeling in Ukraine today in terms that Israelis can understand.
It's their moment of 1948, no less. And some of them, they're comparing Zelensky to David Ben-Gurion.
This week, a year into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I made Svetlova a cup of tea in Jerusalem and we spoke about what matters now. Ksenia, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a pleasure to host you here in our Jerusalem offices. And you're here because I want to pick your brain over the year of the Russian invasion to Ukraine. And so I ask you, Ksenia, what matters now?
Well, what matters is, of course, the upcoming Russian attack, a new attack of Ukraine that was announced basically by Putin in the beginning of the year. Nobody knows exactly what is the plan and whether the Russians even have the ability to, join the forces and to send more soldiers into battle than they do now. What kind of weapon can they present that they did not present so far? But at least the Ukrainians are getting ready. The winter is over. The spring is coming. And of course, the front will be re-energized again.
Okay, so far, a year in, Russia has lost something like 200,000 soldiers. Ukraine has lost somewhere between 100,000 to 130 Ukrainians, including civilians. Who do you see winning the war right now?
Well, I was looking at this phenomenal photo of President Biden standing with President Zelensky in Kiev. And they were standing in the background. There was this monastery, spectacular, with gold domes. It's called Mikhailovsky Monastery. And here they are, 1 year later, after Putin basically planned to take Kiev in 3 days. 3 days, okay? So after a year, Biden feels safe enough to go to Kiev, to embrace Zelensky, to signal to Russia that Ukraine today is firmly in the American sphere of interest. So I think it's quite clear who is winning. But this is talking about morale, about, so in the victory or in the battlefield, I do not expect that the end game, will unfold soon. This is something that it's ongoing war. It can freeze, it can be re-energized, but I do not foresee, in the time being, a military victory for anyone. And perhaps it's impossible altogether.
Okay, so let's unpick Putin's speech from yesterday, which was, to me, as a non-Russian speaker and just hearing it through interpretation, was really striking. For one, him blaming the West for the beginning of the war. Number two, again, the use of neo-Nazis. And number three, this attack on Western non-values, shall we say. So let's begin with number one.
Before we get to that, I just have to mention, and I listened to the whole 2 hours. It's like unbelievable suffering, but I had to do it.
I saw on Twitter that you shared all sorts of memes of people sleeping through the speech.
Yes,
so funny.
The officials, the high-ranking Russian officials were just like, sleeping, snoring during the whole speech. And it's understandable because 90% of it actually focused on economy, on domestic affairs, how he's going to spread now money. He mentioned some trillion rubles I don't know how much is it in dollars right now, but substantial sum of money that he wants to spread it between now different funds and to help the soldiers and to help the families and children and education and everything. Basically, I thought he would never stop. So I think that the focus was basically economy. The war is not doing great. He has nothing to basically present as a clear victory. Russia was losing territory during the last half of the 2022. So when he says that, well, it was not our making, it was not our war, because the West basically forced us to go to this war. So it's not something that we were eager to do and sacrifice our men and so on. Okay, so this is first. This is the doing of the West. But this is something that he says it all the time. He always blames the West for everything, by the way. So from that, to go to, attack on the family values. Again, so it's all the time this comparison. So the West, the evil West that forced us to go to this horrible war, they have this moral degradation. He mentioned pedophilia that is being approved by priests and like other stuff.
Priests are being forced to marry same-sex couples.
So he's stressing the uniqueness of Russia with its traditional family values. We are different. We are different from the West. We are the moral ones. They are the immoral. We want peace. They want war. This dichotomy, it runs through his whole speech. But again, this is nothing new. We know his way of thinking. And while, 20 years ago, 22 even, in the beginning of his reign, he said during his visit to Bundestag that Russia is a friendly European country. He said it by his own lips. So today, you cannot imagine that he would return to this. Russia is different. The West is different, and the war that we wage is essentially not with Ukraine; it's with the West. And there's no wonder that we are not doing perhaps so great. He doesn't say it, but he implies that the whole might of the West that lied to us, they promised promises to us not to expand NATO, and they're doing this. Basically, we were forced to defend ourselves, otherwise we would be destroyed. And family values, again, this is what makes us different from the other guys.
So before we get to the neo-Nazi part, how did the Russians actually hear this? I mean, he's saying it, but are they believing it? Are they on the same page?
Unfortunately, I can tell you that many people believe what he says because they were brainwashed for so long. And, it can happen to any society, especially if it's a authoritarian regime, closed society, not much interaction, and not much interaction like how? For example, I was looking at the Russian academic community. They were publishing in Russian all the time. For me, as somebody who's doing her endless PhD, it's like unimaginable. But how there is no interaction between you and what other people are doing in England, in US, in Canada, and so on. Basically, they were secluded. In this situation, it's very easy to brainwash you about the neo-Nazis, about us, winning. So, but you are giving up territory. How we are winning? No, it's tactic. It's tactic. We will regain the territory. We will prevail. It's a sure deal because God is with us. Okay, this is something that is very strong, and Putin makes sure to show up at the church. He's not perhaps a religious person, but this is the image that he's building to himself.
Amazing. Now let's talk about the neo-Nazis, which at the beginning of the war, at least, was being used by both sides, but I'm not sure if it still is by the Ukrainians. So talk about the Russian use of the neo-Nazi imagery.
So, I think that in order to understand how did Putin reach, this idea to label Ukrainians with their Jewish president and Jewish Minister of Defense and tons of Jewish MPs and advisors and businessmen and so on to, label them as neo-Nazis. It was something that there was a build-up to that during the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years. The narrative of the victory in the Second World War, Russians are the victors, and Europe was weak. It fell and collaborated. It fell to the Nazis, and perhaps now we are repeating, this situation of 80 years ago. We are the good ones, and they're the bad ones. Again, dichotomy. So every time that there was this parade of some neo-Nazi movement and so on, it was presented in Russian TV. I'm talking to you about 2012, for example, 13, 14, and more so after the annexation of Crimea. So we have a cause. We have over neo-Nazis over there, and for Russian person, every family had somebody who fought in the Second World War. If there are Nazis across the border, so we have to fight them, of course. So this is the worst thing that you can say about a person. A Nazi or a neo-Nazi, they confuse this item sometimes. But in any case, this is how he sold this war to the Russians. He said to them, listen, you see the Nazi symbols. Sometimes it was fake, sometimes it was real. Also, in Russia, there are neo-Nazi movements. Some of them are quite strong. While Ukraine has the lowest level of anti-Semitism in the whole Europe. It's remarkable. But truth is not the question here. What is the truth? The image. The Russian people, unfortunately, not all, but many of them, they fell completely prey to this propaganda and convincing them of, we are doing what we have to do because look at them. This is like intolerable. How you can, in 8 years, 10 years, make people feel this animosity towards the other people that are your brethren. Slavic people, the language is similar, the culture is similar, the history in the Soviet Union is similar. It's unbelievable.
So basically, it's the archetype of evil more than anything else. Let's talk about the final aspect of the speech that I find perhaps most troubling as somebody who grew up under the nuclear arms race. We're of a similar age.
And me both.
You and me both, exactly. I in Canada, you in Russia. And I just remember, drills hiding under my desk against the nuclear war.
Same.
And
Yes.
Okay, the same. So, of course, he said, Putin yesterday, that he's going to suspend, which apparently is not a real thing, but suspend the New START treaty. So talk to me about this.
Well, this is a treaty that basically it's the last treaty of the nuclear control that were signed since 1972. There were a number of treaties. Sometimes there were new treaties or extensions of the existing ones. This was the extension of something that was signed in 2010 when the atmosphere was completely different. And there were competition, but also there were cooperation. It was nothing of a kind today, and Putin mentioned that. We signed this treaty in 2010, the New START, because there was trust, and obviously in 2021 we renewed it. But today, when he accused the West of using the territory of Ukraine to pound the Russian strategic Air Force bases that theoretically can also carry a nuclear bomb. So you are doing this, and you expect from us that we will let you, as check out our sites. We are not about to do this. I think that it's important to understand the context to this. There is not much that a year after the beginning of this crazy war, Putin can do to flex his muscle and to make the Americans, the Europeans, to shake with fear, because his conventional abilities are very modest. And he wasted half of his T-72 tanks, the long-term missiles, all of these precision missiles. They have a problem. They have a real problem. But the nuclear weapon, so again, they are doing this since 2015. You have this boogeyman. You see what we can do if you will press us to the wall. So every time that Ukraine gets substantial help from the West, and now it was also symbolic with Biden's visit, I think this is basically the only thing that he could do without basically breaking the rules of this, unwritten rules of this current war, but also saying, listen, I still have, my abilities, what they are, and I'm just, I'm not about to break the rules first, but if you will do some trials, so then I will also do it, basically playing with this very accurately. It was less evil, it was less sharp than his previous threats. I was under the impression that, the tone was different. It was, again, can be wrong, but it felt like that he was very cautious. He wanted to make a point, but he was also very cautious about not to scare, perhaps also his friends and partners in China that were not very pleased with this destabilization that stemmed from, this kind of threats. So I think that he was very careful. I'm doing something. You are warned. I have few more several items, in my bag. If you will continue support Ukraine and give them more advanced weapons, which Biden didn't give during his current visit, no fighter jets or anything of this kind. So each side, again, during the whole year, the red lines are being mended a little bit, but not to the degree that one of the sides completely breaks the rules, not even Putin.
Okay, let's talk about the flip side. President Zelensky for a minute. At the beginning of the war, one of his famous statements was, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." And in the meantime, he's gotten at least promises of a lot of ammunition and some ammunition itself. But how do you see his role or his status as changing over the past year?
Well, he enjoyed unbelievable support from his people from day one, when it was clear that he's not going anywhere, despite the rumors and despite the proposals of American president to give him a refuge and so on. And he continues to be this celebrity, a person who is deeply revered and loved by many people. There is criticism, however, about his surrounding, people who are next to him. Corruption exists. Corruption and war usually go together. And again, this is something that nobody in the West is asking too much questions at this moment. But when the war will either go to this frozen stage or it ends somehow, then there will be very tough questions about what happened. Did he know? What was the level of his awareness of all of this? But for now, again, this is something that the spirits are very high in Ukraine. And when he speaks to the people, he records this sometimes bi-weekly message and so on. And the people are just like watching it. Like, oh my God, yes, this is what we need to do. Even if it's tough now, even if we are freezing in our houses, we basically were reborn as a nation. This is something very huge. It's their moment of 1948, no less. And some of them, they are comparing Zelensky to David Ben-Gurion. So there was a country before, there were presidents before, but not even close to this basically symbolism and this feeling of national pride and ability, and finally respect from people around the world for truly remarkable achievement. 1 year since the Russian invasion, when nobody gave a chance, this president and this nation persevered and succeeded, and also convincing the whole world to support it, which is huge achievement. It can end very differently. And basically, I think that many in the West were ready for this to go like, okay, so Putin conquers Kiev, changes the regime. It's tough, but what can we do?
Happens.
Some more sanctions maybe, yes, but not something dramatic. And then, you have this. He changed the course of history.
Now, you said the whole world supports, but there are various degrees of support, of course, and Israel is one country that has had perhaps a lesser degree of support that even some of its members of Knesset would want, who just visited this week Ukraine. I'm talking about Yulia Edelstein and Zev Elkin, of course, who were born in Ukraine. But Israel has been dancing this very difficult waltz between everyone, essentially, because of the Russian influence in our region. So let's talk about, is that really a good enough excuse to not support Ukraine?
Personally, I do not believe that it's a good enough excuse, because everything changed during this year. The position of Russia changed, the status, the prestige, the ability. We see how they are overstretched in Ukraine. It's still far-fetched to imagine that they will leave Syria. This is a significant asset for them. But we see also how at the same time they are basically leaving some patches of territory there to the Iranians, simply because they cannot overstretch them in two places at the same time. And Syria is, it's active, the civil war is over, but the insurgency is not done. You have to basically invest, you have to take care, you have to be there all the time, So I think that, again, seeing at what is the real ability of the Russian army, and it was overestimated, I think, by all military experts in the world, overestimating, the ability to inflict harm. We see how the red lines that were clearly put by Russia to the Europeans, so if you give tanks, we will do this. If you will give, Patriot, for the Americans, we will do this. We will retaliate, we will do that, we'll do that. Okay, so things happen. Aid flows to Ukraine, and the Russians have to just kind of deal with it. So I think that it's very difficult to change these red lines now for Israel, only because it wasted so much time convincing itself that we have to obey, we have to, keep decent relations and so on. But I think, again, when we are talking about defensive weapons, we are not talking about, supplying to Ukraine Merkava tanks or something like this. But a David Sling, I don't think that Iron Dome is the suitable system, for them. But in his last meeting with Eli Cohen, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Zelensky basically named more specifically David Sling, for example. What would happen? So again, Russia that is overstretched, what would it do now in Syria to inflict harm on Israel?
Well, I think that's part of the question. Russia is overstretched. Some people say 97% of the Russian army is in Ukraine right now. So is it in Israel's interest to leave as much as possible in Syria to, as you said, stamp down the Iranian influence? Is that Israel's interest?
I do not think that Russia ever could limit Iranian influence in Syria. I see the cooperation there at two levels. You have the significant, air bases and air power that is managed by Russia. And you have the boots on the ground, it's the Iranians. And one cannot do without the other. So they cooperate. They have common goal. So perhaps, they had some different image of who will control what part of the Syrian economy. This is totally understandable, So Putin wanted to give to his oligarchs, and the Iranians eyed also, a few things there. But rather than that, they are not competing there so much.
What is their common goal?
The common goal is the survival of Assad's regime, of course, and both of them want to use Syria as a platform for their future activities. For the Iranians, it's the stretch to the Arab Middle East, and for the Russians, it's the control of the shore of the Mediterranean, access to Mediterranean. Europe is just over here, so you need to, they don't have the access otherwise to the Mediterranean. It's the first time that their dream about this exit to the warm sea was fulfilled. And it's a huge deal, of course. But again, I'm talking about Israel. And again, I'm, listening to military experts such as Amos Yadlin, who's been saying repeatedly for the last 6-7 months, it's time to give defensive weapons to Ukraine because we have more to lose from not giving them then risk it and they say, oh, why did we do it? Either Israel is part of the collective West, and right now this is the battle of the collective West. It's not what, the Cohen said during his visit to Kiev, Iran. Okay, Iran is our pain. It's our mortal enemy. It's all clear. But you cannot talk about Iran in Ukraine without naming Russia. And this is, the challenge, the Russian challenge to the, collective West, to the liberal democracy. Again, it's very, given the situation in which Israel is today, there are questions whether indeed Israel is a part of this big camp, democratic Western countries anymore, or whether it will continue to be like this. But if we, consider ourselves, yes, a liberal democracy, part of the West, then I think that, there is just one way. It's to join this effort and to continue with very strict restrictions on the Russian money that flows to Israel. So far, it was close to perfect, from what I know. But you can always do better. You can introduce sanctions, for example. Somebody told me that the Knesset lacks mechanism to, introduce sanctions. Okay, if you can do the judicial reform in a couple of months, you certainly can, write a bill about introducing sanctions about specific personalities, companies, and so on.
Okay, so the other country that has not been outwardly supporting Ukraine or Russia is not a Western country. It's China, which many are saying that if it were to join one side or the other, boom, World War III. What do you say?
I think that Chinese are always doing what's better for the Chinese. So they are not there to support Putin. They are not there to support Ukraine. They are supporting the interest of Beijing. And in this regard, so you have traditional continuation of voting of China with Russia at UN Security Council. This is one. At the same time, the Russians were disappointed by the lack of economic support and military support to their effort in Ukraine. I don't know what calculations did they have about China. Frankly, I didn't follow it so much. But I can tell you that now, when Russia is very pressed for sources of income, it cannot anymore sell gas to Europe, oil, so the two places where it can sell it, it's to China, but China demands a huge discount. And then it's basically at net worth, so you do it in order to not to seal, the oil
pumping.
Yes, pumping. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, you do not gain from this so much. And they also can sell oil to Latin America. But, if you're looking the way of the tankers, it's, the way is much longer. And of course, it diminishes the ability to do this. So basically, they depend on Chinese today. Chinese do not depend on them, on nothing. And more so, the Chinese are worried of this reckless behavior, this, mentioning all the time of the nuclear threat and so on. The Chinese need stability, mostly on the oil markets, but not only, for the economy to succeed and grow and so on. So the relations are chilly. They are not picking sides, which I think it's the best that you can get for the West. It's the best that you can get right now. And again, for the sanctions, this is also very important. There is this kind of image that, the Western world introduced sanctions against Russia, but there are tons of ways to evade them. The last packages of sanctions that were introduced, one by one, they curtail the ability of Russia to get help from some other partners in order to evade the sanctions. Whether it's Turkey that, they received the Russian paying method, Mir card, and after some pressure from the United States, they stopped. So I've been just now in Abu Dhabi. I saw Russian tourists unable also to use their cards over there. So it means the pressure is working. And I think that it will continue growing.
Okay, we've been talking very much on a global level. Now let's zoom into the Jewish communities in both Russia and in Ukraine. What do you know about what's happening there?
Well, you have Jews living in a more significant and quick tempo, Russia, than they do, Ukraine. I'm talking about Aliyah to Israel. So more Russian Jews came to Israel during last year than Ukrainian Jews. First of all, because for many Ukrainian Jews, the husbands are fighting, or the brothers, and the family is staying somewhere in Europe in, hoping to reconnect, and whether, to stay in Ukraine, some other place, but to reconnect, it's closer. Russian Jews, that they are lacking options because they're not wanted anywhere. It's becoming more difficult to go to other countries, even Georgia, which received over, I think, 150,000 refugees from Russia, is, starting to stop some people at the crossing points and so on. And there are also this feeling that the Georgians are not very happy with this influx of Russians to their country. So Israel, for now, is still open. And I think that Aliyah will definitely increase. Maybe we'll reach 100,000. It depends on what will be happening. But when, Putin, every time that he talks about, hints that there will be new mobilization wave and so on, this is something that makes people, especially in the Jewish community, no, we don't want this. We don't want for our children to go to this war, and they go away. The Jewish institutions in Russia, to my opinion, they are fully controlled right now by the, state security apparatus and all of this. And we see how in the International Holocaust Day, Putin summoned the two chief rabbis, Boroda and Berlazar, and they discussed neo-Nazis and this threat to the world and so on. So it was like unbelievable to have two Jewish people sitting with men who wages this brutal war against the nation and killing people there and talking about neo-Nazis. But that's the level of control, so just like in Iran, the Jewish representatives of the community can be summoned in order to have
good optics.
Yes, good optics. Yes, it's an image that you have Jews that support him and Muslims who support him and so on. I would say that the atmosphere is kind of bleak. There are still people who are sitting on the fence because they know that Aliyah to Israel is becoming increasingly difficult. They also hear about the possible change of the law of return, and they don't know what to make out of it so much, so they're confused, and not necessarily Israel will be the answer, in the future. For Ukrainian Jews, again, it's the same. Less of them are coming to Israel, but I think that if you want to help Ukraine and you want to help Jews there, you have to have your door open for them all the time, without, this making this, proportion of blood runs in the veins, Jewish blood. So, both communities, in Ukraine, the situation is much worse, of course, because many communities were just destroyed completely. They were evacuated, and they will never resume their work. Some people ended in Germany, some in Israel. Communities are dispersed. This is a horrific ravage of this Jewish life that was rebuilt since the beginning of 90s. It will be very difficult to reinstate it, even if people will go back. Some cities will be unlivable for decades.
Okay, so we've talked about the Ukraine invasion. Since you are a former member of Knesset, and you've kind of touched here and there on how you feel about the judicial overhaul that's happening here in Israel, but please, b'chol zot, in any case, give me a few words of your thoughts on this.
For me, especially since I was born in the autocratic country, and I have this historic memory also of my own family, where my own grandfather, he was sentenced to 10 years of gulags in 1938, and he was executed before he reached the gulags. The court was very quick. The judges were nominated by the Communist Party, and that's it. So for people who say to me, listen, this is Russia, this is Soviet Union, it doesn't have any connection to our life here. What do you mean? I said, no. But at the same time, when you give the politicians this absolute power over all of the branches of authority, you have to expect that bad things will happen. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So this is very scary. I participate in both the demonstrations, of course, as a civilian, but also as an ex-MK. I participate in this initiative of Zava Galon, ex-head of Meretz, Tzav Chirum. This is an initiative of ex-MKs who are coming to the Knesset, to the committees, and reinforcing the opposition members who are there. Some of them are new, some of them do not have experience. So we are sitting there, we are asking also for an opportunity to speak out. So, and there is also a petition that was signed in less than a week by 250,000 of Israeli citizens, and the numbers are growing all the time. I personally think it's my duty. I saw it basically developing in my years in Knesset, since 2015 until 2019, during the 20th Knesset, when it was clear that the charges will be pressed against Benjamin Netanyahu. Then they started. Before that, Netanyahu didn't have any problem with the judiciary. He praised it. He was proud of it. He always, made an example of how great our judiciary. The moment the charges were pressed, this horrible campaign started against the judiciary and police and prosecutors and media. It was ongoing, So I'm really scared for the democratic future of this country, and for me, and especially for those of us who came from other countries like Olim. You say, I made this way. It was difficult. Integration and all of this, but this country became mine. And now I see how its fundamental, basics are being ruined for personal reasons, just for somebody to escape the trial. It's unbelievable.
Ksenia, thank you so much for sharing your insight and your expertise into everything we talked about today.
Thank you. With great pleasure. Toda rabba.
Hello, I'm sitting here with Lazer Berman, our diplomatic correspondent, who has had a chance to listen to what former member of Knesset Ksenia Svetlova said about the Russian invasion to Ukraine and where we stand, etc., etc. So, Lazer, I'd just like to hear your thoughts about what she said, that Russia's presence in Syria is not really a good enough excuse for Israel not to provide at least defensive anti-air missiles and things of the nature to Ukraine. Do you agree?
Yes, I've never at any point in the war thought it was a good enough excuse. The IDF and Israel in general is much, much more powerful than Russia in the Middle East, and we always have been. And there's no way that Russia can match us on our borders. I understand that we don't want to bring an unnecessary fight to ourselves, but in the past, in the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was much more powerful than Russia is today, and Israel was much less powerful than Israel is today, Israel had no problem killing Soviet pilots and anti-aircraft crews over our borders in Egypt and Syria when they got in the way of our operations. So if it came to that, if the Russians decided to actively get in the way of what we're trying to do in Syria, we certainly should not be afraid of sending the right kind of message. And I think the fact that we're presenting ourselves as so deterred and so weak because of the presence of some slightly problematic Russian capabilities over our borders, I think sends the wrong message and shows that we are not going to necessarily pursue our interests and our values, but we can be pushed around by bullies like Russia.
So why do you think Israel is taking that stance and has been taking that stance through several governments now?
At the same time, in addition to what I just said, I don't think it's such a ridiculous position for Israel because let's remember, Israel is, I would say, 100% part of the West and 50% part of the region as well, if that works mathematically. And I think that Israel's position kind of reflects that dual nature, right? So it offers humanitarian aid. It says things that are in line with the West. At the same time, like its neighbors around the region and beyond, if you look in the Gulf, if you look Arab countries, if you look at India, Turkey even, these are not countries that are imposing their own sanctions on Russia. There are countries that understand it's not their fight. Europe and the West sees this as the big moral fight, in the past, I don't know how long you want to go back, since the end of the Cold War. But we in the region, we know we have our own fights. And this is it's a tragic situation. It's certainly an illegal aggression by Russia. But there's other fights in the world that the world hasn't paid as much attention to. I'm sure the Arab world is thinking about Yemen. In the subcontinent, they're looking at other wars that have happened there that, the West paid some attention to, but not the same. And we have Iran. So I don't think it's crazy at all that Israel pursues its own interests, while at the same time trying to do as much as it can for Ukraine. With that said, I think it can do more without violating its interests and without harming Israeli security.
Okay. We started our conversation, Ksenia and I, talking about what's next for the war. So take us out with that as well.
Absolutely. I just would like to reflect, as she did, as when I was there before the war, I thought the war's not going to happen. The war started. I expected it to be over very quickly, judged on past Ukrainian performance. It's incredible what they've done for the past year. It's incredible that they're really winning this thing. But at the same time, there's going to be no Ukrainian march on Moscow to end this, and there's going to be no Russian drive into Kyiv. It's not going to happen. This is going to end at some point with a negotiated settlement. The terms of that are still obviously being fought over now on the battlefield. Russia seems determined to throw what they have left, which is really manpower, not a ton of equipment, but manpower, into another offensive. It seems like that offensive has started around Bakhmut in southeastern Ukraine. What I would expect is Russia to make some gains in the next couple of months. When that offensive has culminated, when they run out of gas, you'll see a much larger Ukrainian counteroffensive in the spring, and that could be decisive. So I think in a best case scenario, you're looking at late spring or early summer, where Russia could really be knocked off balance and be brought to some sort of negotiating table. Worst case is this kind of gets stuck World War I style, where they expected a very quick war at the beginning, and now both sides kind of jockey with each other over very small pieces of territory. That's not a good scenario, but I can't see the West giving up on that now. The one wild card there is if in late 2024, if let's say Donald Trump comes back to office, or a Republican who really sees things like him, that could really limit American aid, which would limit Western aid to the fight, and that could really shake things up as well.
Laser, thank you for all of that.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's What Matters Now with Ksenia Svetlova. Special thanks to our producer, Gilad Brownstein, and my podcast partner in crime, Jessica Steinberg. As always, a shout out to Feedback Whiz, Mick Weinstein. Have something you want to tell us at What Matters Now? Drop us a line at podcast@timesofisrael.com. Enjoy What Matters Now? Subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. Until next week, shalom.